Hello and welcome to the Cyber Academic, where I talk to students, academics, and industry experts about topics where the cyber domain intersects with the real world. My name is Ahmed Ibrahim, and I am a lecturer and researcher in cybersecurity at Edith Cowan University. This is episode number 4 with Tarun Patel. Tarun is a recent graduate from ECU and works at Woodside Energy as a Cyber Security Analyst. During high school, his favorite subject was chemistry, but he decided to make the switch to cybersecurity when he joined university. He shares this journey with us and talks about his work experience during the COVID lockdown and how a group project at uni led to his first job. Tarun also talks about the importance of gaining the basic skills, getting into CTFs early, and the advantage of having good mentors. Welcome to the Cyber Academic, Tarun. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, very good. Thank you. So, Tarun, you are currently working as a cybersecurity analyst in Woodside, and you also graduated from ECU quite recently. So, would you care to share what your job entails in Woodside?
Yep. So, as a cybersecurity analyst, I work more in the operations team at Woodside. So, dealing with the more day-to-day stuff, incident response style activity.
When you first got into the cybersecurity studies in ECU, was this a kind of career path you wanted to take, or this is just one of those beginning steps where your goal is somewhere else, but you obviously have to start somewhere?
No, not at all. So, when I finished high school, I had quite a few options in terms of what I wanted to do, and I narrowed it down to either chemistry or computers. And then I learned that there wasn't many jobs in chemistry, so I narrowed it down to computers. Yeah, within there's cybersecurity, software engineering, computer science. I just didn't really know what to do. I knew I liked computers, I just didn't know what stream I should take. And then I heard another thing. There's a lot of jobs in cybersecurity. I went,
Yeah,
all right, easy pickings.
yeah.
Let's just go cybersecurity.
I think you made a good choice. But what a contrast between chemistry and cybersecurity. That's quite
Yeah, those are
interesting.
two things I really like doing at school. And so, as they say, follow what you have interest in, follow what you have a passion for, and
Yeah.
go in that direction.
So after high school, you straight away joined university.
Yeah.
And when you were doing your undergrad course, what sort of subjects did you really enjoy? I know you are a top student in almost all the subjects, but there must be favorites in there, right?
I definitely think first year was my favorite year because it was a lot of foundational knowledge. So it was a lot of new stuff. Like when you get into second and third year, there is new stuff in second and third year, but it's building upon stuff that you already know of. Whereas first year was introducing something that you may have never heard of in the first place. So like compute, I don't think they call it that. I think it's mathematics for computing now. Back
Yeah,
when we did it was computer fundamentals. Like that
yeah,
was a math unit that I really enjoyed it because of it was just all logic,
mm,
and ors and just putting it together in these sequences. I thought it was a lot of fun. Like they were like brain teasers in a sense.
hmm
Other ones like programming principles. Um, what else? There was definitely applied comms and operating systems. Those are controversial ones. I hear a lot of people don't necessarily like them because it's so content heavy. But
yeah,
I think because there was so much interesting stuff in there, especially in operating systems, like how memory is managed, how the CPU manages its resources. I thought that was just like so fascinating, like
mhm.
how they developed the computers to work in that way. Um, yeah, yeah, those units are controversial. Though, yeah, I'm sure you hear a lot of varying opinions about
Yeah, yeah. They're a
how they
very,
found it.
they're the two contrasting sides. That those who really love it and those who really hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you'd find that in quite a few of those subjects. But obviously, every subject has got a purpose for being there in the course, and it builds upon those knowledge that you learn throughout the years. So, um, So afterwards, what happened? Were you drawn more towards programming units, networking units? What sort of thing did you really like?
Afterwards, I think it was more, yeah, I would say maybe more programming because it's more discrete problem solving. So I think my brain works in a way that I like solving little problems, like not like a huge problem. So things like ethical hacking, what's the other one? Reverse engineering. Those things are kind of smaller, discrete problems that you look at and you start figuring out piece by piece and how it all works together, and then you kind of go from there. So I definitely enjoyed those units more in that sense.
While you were a student here, you were also involved in some other activities, right? I believe you were doing some training in CTF related activities. Would you care to share a
Yep.
little bit more about that?
Yep. So a CTF or capture the flag, they're mini challenges where there's some sort of task or problem that you're supposed to overcome. And when you overcome that problem, you get a piece of text that you submit as your answer. And that piece of text is evidence to say that you were able to solve the problem. And so the competition goes, the more flags you get, the more points you get, and therefore your rank on the leaderboard. And so, as part of while I was at ECU, I was introduced to a club that was run by Peter Hannay, and it was about training students in competing for CISCA. And now CISCA was a national competition where all the universities and TAFEs compete within Australia in this CTF. And so that's where I started I guess that was my introduction, my gateway into the CTF realm. And from there, I thought it was fantastic. I loved it. You know, you get that buzz every time you solve a flag, especially when you've never used computers in the way that you're using it like that before, in terms of hacking things, reverse engineering things, basically understanding the more underlying features of how a computer works, where normally you just open Word and use your browser, but you never necessarily question how do I download that web page, or how can I abuse the web page to do something different. And then from there, I ended up taking over and running that same club after Peter Hannah had left. And so it was, training the next year of students to how they could learn the CTF challenges and how I could learn by teaching other people as well. And that was my, I guess, volunteer within that CTF realm at ECU.
So I think lately we have seen CTFs becoming quite popular. There are quite a few CTF challenges coming up here and there. What is it about CTFs that's so interesting or so attractive? Earlier you mentioned, when you solve a problem or when you capture a flag, there's that rush of excitement. So is that the competitive side of cybersecurity students, or what curiosity? What do you think is driving this sort of activities?
I definitely think the competitive element helps drive it, but it also gives you purpose in terms of trying to learn something. Um, an example being when we look at applied comms, it might not be quite clear what the purpose is of those units because it's all foundational knowledge. But if I was doing network scanning and I was doing applied comms at the same time, because I remember a very discrete example where I didn't know what subnets were, but I knew when I typed in the command, I had to put a /24 because that's just what I was told.
Hmm.
And then I got to applied comms and I learned what a subnet was, and I made the connection in my head. That's why I put the /24.
Mm.
That's why I've done this in applied comms. And then so it became more intriguing to do these challenges because I had a reason to learn, if that makes sense. It was to
Yeah,
overcome this problem. I have to put the research in, put the time in, and then once you solve that problem, you're rewarded with the flag.
yeah.
And so that sense of, reward that you get from solving the problem and then getting the points from it really helps provide that motivation and encouragement to keep doing more
Mm.
problems and solving more problems and getting more flags. And it becomes a bit like an addiction, but in a good way. You
Yeah.
learn a lot of stuff really quickly afterwards.
So, do you think students, regardless their technical level, they should just join CTFs or try these things out by themselves, or do you think new students find it a little bit intimidating to get into this?
Oh, for sure. I definitely think it can be intimidating if you don't have any kind of support system in the
Yeah.
sense of, someone who's a bit more experienced to help you out. Not to say that you can't do it at all. It just makes it a bit more intimidating to get started. And I felt the same way when I started. I had never used Kali Linux before. I'd never used virtual machines before. Straight out of high school, the most technical thing I would have done is maybe inspect Element in my browser, at most. So um, yeah, hearing about all these new things, not using Bash or knowing the command line, it definitely starts off quite intimidating. But if someone tells you, start here, and then from there you start, you have a goal, you have an objective, and then you build the skills from one point. You don't get overwhelmed because you're not trying to do 500 different things to start learning. You just start from one point, build up your skills in that one point, and then move on to somewhere else after you start building up those foundational skills. Definitely recommend getting into CTFs as early as you can. It definitely helped when I was doing my course because most of the content, or a lot of the content, wasn't necessarily new. It was just going in more depths of things that I had seen in CTFs. So an example being reverse engineering wasn't a completely new concept to me. I'd already understood what reverse engineering was because I'd done some challenges, but it made me go more depth and made me look at it from a malware perspective, which is not something that you often come across in a CTF challenge.
You mentioned about getting a mentor to, ease into the CTFs or to the more technical side of cybersecurity skill sets. Would you advise students to seek mentors from more senior students or from industry? Or, there are lots of online venues as well where you can do this sort of stuff. What would you advise students to seek?
That's an interesting question. I guess the first part, if you were to ask, you would have to start networking and knowing people and asking those questions. Um, I've seen a lot of people make blogs about how to get started into cybersecurity.
Mhm.
Having a read of those, and not that I remember any of the top of my head, but I have seen them around, and they're really good advice, like where to start in terms of what resources to use first. But definitely having someone more experienced that you can ask for guidance for is, I feel, pretty important. And if you can find someone like that, I would recommend it. But you also do have your lecturers as well as another side of things. If you're less comfortable with your student peers or someone in industry, you have your lecturers that you see all the time who could definitely help you out in some of those things. An example being if you're doing something simple. So if you're starting to learn the command line, I definitely had a lot of struggle picking up the command line when I first started because I didn't quite understand what I was typing. I was just copy and pasting things in.
Mhm.
But then having someone who understands it, that doesn't necessarily tell you the answers, but is able to guide you in a way of learning. So that way you can find the answer yourself, where you can't necessarily do that if you hit a brick wall. You get stuck. And having someone who knows what your problem is, but doesn't actually tell you how to solve it, they tell you where to look to solve it. Those kind of things are really important in your own growth of learning new things.
What I've experienced as a lecturer is, consistently been students hesitating to ask questions, or maybe it's hesitation, or maybe it is just that, they don't want to ask those questions. But from a student perspective, what's the barrier that actually stops students from being more interactive or ask those questions?
I think one thing that comes to mind is sounding dumb. No one wants to sound dumb in front of everyone. It's quite embarrassing or intimidating, and that might be a big barrier for people to ask questions.
Okay.
But it can also be a matter of feeling like you're inconveniencing other students if your question isn't quite broad enough. So if we're an example being if you're talking about programming, and your code isn't working, maybe a lecture room isn't necessarily the more appropriate place to ask that kind of question that your code isn't working. But then they don't maybe ask in the tutorial either, and they get a bit stuck. But I think it's fine to sound dumb. Like, what's the worst that will happen? At least you learn something at the end of it. That's why you pay to go to university, right?
That's right. Yeah. So have you felt that way in classroom, or you just didn't care? You asked questions anyway.
I think I just ask questions anyways. I think if I ever did feel that way, I would still ask them though. I just maybe wouldn't have asked them in front of everyone.
Yeah.
Um, so an example might be in a tutorial or lab, I might ask the question rather than asking it. And yeah, I definitely can understand that intimidation of having the question in front of everyone.
Hmm.
Um, but still, there's nothing to stop you from asking in a more private setting if you do have those questions.
Yeah.
Something that was more utilized near the end of my degree was things like the Discord and Teams,
Yep.
which I thought was fantastic because it's instant messaging, but it's
Yep.
also not linked to anyone's personal devices. So I don't have to take phone numbers or anything like that, but I can
Hmm.
still get questions in really quickly. And also I can send code snippets and go, hey, can you have a look at this code and tell me what's wrong or where my problems are? Um, and so that definitely made it more accessible for students to ask questions, because you can ask smaller questions and get an answer really quickly rather than having to type up the whole email. Or I guess Blackboard might feel a bit slow because you have to monitor Blackboard to get the reply back. The disadvantage of it is that less people, if you have the same question as someone else, then people don't necessarily see that afterwards either.
Hmm. I think that's a really good point because I've also started using Teams more and more over the past couple of semesters, and I've seen students felt more comfortable just messaging straight away, and it was even more convenient for me to immediately respond to those things. So definitely, it's been, I think, more accessible for students to interact. Yeah, that's a very good point. So when you were in ECU, you were also an excellence ambassador, isn't it?
Yeah, so
What does that
I
mean?
was. I couldn't tell you. So in my first year, um, based off my grades, they offered me a role as an excellence ambassador. And so the idea was to volunteer at ECU events, such as giving speeches or to like high school students, or kind of just being involved in those ECU events. But it wasn't, well, not necessarily saying it was bad. It just, I didn't have many opportunities to volunteer, I guess would be a better way of putting it. Um, so I didn't, yeah, I put it there, but I didn't necessarily do a lot with it.
I remember during the summer of cyber events that we conducted, you were also on one of those teams, right? How was that
Yes,
experience?
Summer of Cyber. Oh man, that's how I got my job in the first place.
Yeah.
So, Summer of Cyber, I guess for anyone who doesn't know, SRI was hosting a sort of internship over the summer break, over the uni summer break, and it would be a bunch of students who would work on a project together, and then at the end of the project they would present it, and they would have 7 weeks of paid valuable cybersecurity work experience, and it was fantastic. And so I worked in a project that was for Summer of Malware. That was the name of my project. And the idea was to build a system that would automatically deploy the system, and the system was to analyze malware. So it was to orchestrate the malware being captured and then storing the malware securely, analyzing the malware, and then sending off all the IOCs that it found if it was malicious to an open source framework so that other people could use those IOCs and deploy them in their environment. So
Hmm.
it might sound a little bit, I guess, crazy. That's because it kind of was. Um, but it's basically just to automatically analyze malware, and it's made for smaller businesses so that way they could, you know, have that opportunity to not pay thousands and thousands of dollars. It was more accessible to those smaller businesses to have that kind of malware analysis process.
So during that 7 weeks, you were working with a small team, and I remember it being a successful project. What was your biggest takeaway from that project as a member of the team?
Uh, um, that you might, well, I guess not necessarily a member of the team. Well, the first thing that I would think of is I didn't even think I would get the job being a first year student. Thinking that, second year, third years, they would know so much more than me. So I almost didn't apply. But the person running the project was also the same guy who was running the Cisco training, Peter Hannay. He gave me these great words of advice, and it was, if I don't think you're good enough, I won't accept you anyways. So you might as well just apply. And it really stuck with me. It was
Yeah.
like, yeah, you raise a good point. What's the worst that's going to happen? They say no. If I didn't apply in the first place, I've already lost. And so I put my resume together and sent it through, and I got accepted. I was super happy about it. Um, and then, so as being part of that team, it was really being able to see the difference between the skill sets and the strengths. So some people were much stronger coders than others, but then others were better at the more networking side of things and the more administrative side of things. So we had someone who was a systems administrator, and he knew more about the deployment of the systems and how the networking would work together, but coding wasn't necessarily his strong suit. So then you could supplement that, where I was more programming, like I was more confident with coding, so then I could pick up those parts of the project and contribute in those ways. And also, if you have a problem, communication within the team is really important, because you can't just, keep going back to your manager saying that this is a problem. You have to work as a team and go, hey, I'm having this issue. Can someone help me out? And then it works vice versa, where everyone can help each other, like bring each other up.
Yeah. I guess that team environment is such an important element, especially in cyber. I'm sure it applies to a lot of other areas as well, but in cyber, I think it remains very true. I do come across students when they are doing the applied project option and work as a team. Students always doubt themselves, but at the end of the day, it's a team contribution. It's a team effort, so everybody will have those skill sets to contribute as a whole, which is what you just mentioned. So while you were in in the university, did you engage in other engagement activities outside of the university?
Yeah, for sure. Well, yeah, outside of university, there was security conferences such as WACON and B-Sides, and there's also the monthly engagements like STOTM and Sec Talks. And so those were a great kind of introduction to meeting people who actually work in industry, and just getting a chat with them and understanding what they do for a living. It's a little bit interesting in cyber, because you want to ask someone what they do for their job and no one wants to tell you, right? Because it's so secure. So it's a little bit of a of a fun one to, I guess, walk around. But it's also good to just have those contacts in place and have people that you can, ask questions to in industry about certain topics if you have those problems. And so that was my kind of out of ECU involvement. Um, Other than like other CTFs, I guess that would I apply for. So if there's any CTFs that get run in Perth, or run with like a local community, definitely be a part of those. So like WA CTF being WA's biggest CTF that I know of, which is a great what's it called, event to be a part of. But B-Sides and those conferences are also just fantastic to just sit there and see the kind of research that people put into and what kind of work they do day to day. Those are the types of things that I was getting involved in outside of ECU.
In your final year, in final semester, you chose the work integrated learning option. And how was that experience compared to your university studies?
Compared to my university studies, definitely a lot less academic. There's definitely a great opportunity to kind of see how the differences lie. And in some aspects, I felt they were quite similar, because when you're on the job, a lot of your work is research. You have a problem, and then you don't necessarily, like, no one expects you to know all the answers off the top of your head at every single moment. But what people do expect you to do is be able to find the answers, or have the ability to find the answers if that's what you need to do. And in that sense, that was the same thing at university, right? You can't necessarily just ask a million questions to your lecturer. There has to be some level of self-dependency to do your own research and solve these problems and put it together yourself. And so that element of how academia and work were really like hand in hand, really close together. In terms of the actual work you do, well, yeah, that's a lot more practical. You're getting hands-on. It's different because you're working in a work environment So, there's that professionalism you need to upkeep. If you have clients you need to deal with, like those kind of things all make a shift compared to what you might be experiencing at uni, where it's a lot more laid back. Not necessarily saying work is super uptight, but there's a little bit more standards you have to adhere to.
You did your work integrated learning during the first half of the year, so that must have been during the lockdown, right?
Yep. So I spent 4 weeks in the office, and then after that, the rest of it was working from home. And so that definitely did impact how much I was able to get out of my work experience, which was a
Mm-hmm.
bit disappointing.
Yep.
But it didn't necessarily mean that I didn't do anything. It
Yeah.
was, how do I make myself still get as much as I can out of this experience? And so trying to engage with my other team members, is there any work available, trying to be proactive in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And some, like, for 1 week there actually was just nothing available like that they could really help me with. And so I didn't want to just sit there for 1 week doing nothing. So instead, I just spent 1 week doing Hack the Box for the whole week. So, but it was fantastic. I learned so much in that 1 week because I just spent 8 hours a day doing Hack the Box and learning all the tools, learning the different types of vulnerabilities and how to kind of piece it together. And I was covering stuff that I just had never seen before because I had never dedicated that much time into doing Hack the Box before. Normally when you do a CTF, you do it in your off time, you do it when you're free. But if you're free during the day and you have a whole week and your whole job is pen testing and Hack the Box is also pen testing, it was a really easy click to go, yeah, I should definitely do this for a week and see what I get out of it. And I
Mm.
got a lot out of it. There's a lot of brick walls and a lot of growing pains where you're just stuck,
Yeah.
but then working as part of a security consultancy company, I can always go, hey guys, I'm stuck on this problem.
Hmm.
Can you guys help me? And so that was
You had a
comes back
great
to
team
having
behind.
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Where I can always go to someone and say, all right, I'm stuck now. Like I've exhausted all I know. Hey, do you have any ideas of what I can do next or what I can try next?
Yeah.
Which was also valuable in my learning, my work experience.
Hmm.
But I still did work on other projects as well. In my time and trying to get involved in engagements such as external engagements or trying to get insight into what other people are doing even if I can't do it myself. Like ghosting is a really great way to just start learning by just watching what other people do and absorbing that knowledge of what they're doing into yourself.
So, a few things I picked up from everything that you just mentioned, such as having that motivation to learn, asking questions, disregard looking stupid in the class, still ask questions, not to doubt yourself. What's the thing that can happen? Networking outside of uni, own effort to do the research, and staying self motivated to learn these extra new skills. Do you have any last minute advice that you would give to students who are aiming to get a cybersecurity position or start their career in this industry?
Um, Definitely having a group of people who also have the same interests as you helps a lot. I think being self-motivated all the time is not realistic or sustainable. Sometimes I just don't want to, it's just how it is. But having other people who do want to do it at the times that you don't want to do it gives you that same motivation to keep going. And yeah, just give it a shot. Always just try. Don't just give up on yourself. Don't just say, oh, it's too hard, or like you know I can't do this, without even giving it a shot in the first place. Do what you can to better yourself. Like uni is not the end all in terms of everything you'll need to know. There's definitely a lot that you can take outside of uni as well, and in terms of not just skills but also what people do in industry, what career paths there are. You might think that pen testing or forensics are their only roles in industry, but they're not. There's like loads of roles in industry. It's just about engaging with people to find out what those are.
Excellent. That was really good advice, Tarun. I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for joining in this episode, Tarun.
Yep, thanks for having me on.
Thank you for joining me in this episode. Feel free to follow me on Twitter at AI8RAHIM, that's AI number 8 RAHIM, and leave a comment or keep an eye out for the next episode.